Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Podium Pod, the podcast covering the 2023 FIBA World Cup across Japan, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Brought to you by the Pick and Roll. Head to pickandroll.com.au and subscribe for in-depth commentary and analysis on Aussie hoops. I'm joined today by my broadcast colleague from Clutch Radio and NBL.com.au's Tom Hirsch. Tom, welcome to the show. I'm looking forward to covering the World Cup with yourself as you head over to Japan for the group stages.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, great to be with you. And apologies again that I've missed the kickoff episode last week. But I'm really looking forward to not only this series of podcasts, but just the World Cup in general. And obviously lucky enough to be heading over to Okinawa for the first round in a little bit to follow the Boomers or the start of their quest for another podium finish. But really looking forward to getting stuck into who else is going to be challenging them along the way in some of these other groups, as we'll do today.
Well, we're going to cover Group G and Group H, the last two groups in the FIBA World Cup. And we're going to start with a team that is definitely going to challenge the Boomers in and across this World Cup. And that is the number one team in the world. Spain are the headliners of Group G. They are always there or thereabouts in every international competition they've been in. Of course, famously, silver medal in Beijing in 2008, and they have pushed the USA to their limits across the history of their program. They're a little bit different in terms of their squad these days. They no longer have the Gasol brothers, but they do have a now aging Ricky Rubio on the squad. We remember when he was just a teenager playing in Beijing for that silver medal squad. But Tom, does Spain still have the talent to go all the way?
Absolutely, they do, and really because still the core of this team has played together for so long, and they are so well tested in international play that when they come into these major tournaments, they just know how to get it done. Now, their most recent major tournament, obviously Tokyo 2020, was a little disappointing in terms of a sixth place finish. They did unfortunately meet the US in the quarterfinals, and that was the end of their run towards another medal. But let's not forget, this is the nation that won the last World Cup in 2019 in China. Unfortunately, that was at the expense of our Boomers. They knocked us off in the semi-final, and then we went on to lose to France in the bronze medal game. But this is a team that absolutely can get it done. They won bronze in 2016 in Rio. They finished second in the 2022 Eurobasket. And they've also won the World Cup previously, all the way back in 2006, which was really the start of that golden era of basketball. Now, as you said, yes, it's a slightly different looking roster these days. The Gasol brothers are no longer there. Instead, they're kind of headlined by those Hernan Gomez brothers, Willie and Juancho. Juancho, obviously famous for his movie prowess these days as well.
Adam Sandler.
Yep. But you mentioned Ricky Rubio, and I want to spend a bit of time on Ricky Rubio because as much as he's aging and as much as there are a few doubts as to whether he's actually going to be healthy enough to take the floor in this tournament, I expect him to be there. He actually led the entire tournament in scoring in Tokyo in 2020. Obviously, it was played in 2021, but he's still absolutely lethal in international play. So he's not to be underestimated by any stretch. And then the other thing that this team has going for it is the other veterans that will still be there. The Sergio Yules, the Rudy Fernandezes, the Victor Claves, the Alex Abrinas, and then a few up-and-coming young talents who have made their way in the NBA recently, and Usman Garuba and Santi Aldama. So there is still top to bottom loads of talent on this roster. And if they make a run and if this group clicks together, they could absolutely challenge for a podium finish as they've done so many times in the past.
I love seeing players older than me suit up for the World Cup teams. So Rudy Fernandez at age 38 just fills my heart with joy. And we saw what Luis Scola did at the previous Olympics. He sort of turned back the clock and put Argentina on his back. And, you know, Rudy may not play too many minutes, but he could very well have a couple of cameo roles where he puts the Spanish team on his back and uses all of his experience and nous to be able to score a few key buckets down the stretch.
No doubt. And I expect Ricky Rubio to have a similar impact as well, again, if he's healthy enough to go for this team.
So that's Spain. They're sharing the group with Brazil, yet another team who, you know, dominated or dominated their region in, you know, the 2000s and hasn't got quite the top level talent that it did maybe 20 years ago when it was beaten soundly by Argentina most of the time, but was just about that clear second cut or second tier of South American team. I mean, they still have Bruno Caboclo, who had a cup of coffee in the NBA. I think he was 2 years away from being 2 years away at one point. You have Raul Neto in there as well, Cristiano Felicio, and Tim Suarez, who we have grown accustomed to playing for the Sydney Kings here in Australia for their most recent championship team. So they're 13th in the world. They're probably the biggest threat to Spain in this group. What would you like to see out of Brazil? And is there anyone that you particularly want to watch out for in terms of key performers on this squad?
Well, you mentioned a couple of those younger up-and-coming players, and Bruno Caboclo, who's quite proven at international level, although it hasn't really worked out for him in the NBA. Didier Lazard, another name that I'm not entirely sure if he's going to be on the roster or not, but obviously he was in the NBL with the City Kings for a couple of years as a next star, been with the New Orleans Pelicans. So he's another one that has some talent and has performed for them in some qualifiers along the way. But I'll be keeping an eye on Raul Neto, who you mentioned, but also the veteran Marcelo Huertas. Yes. And we know Huertas was with the Lakers way back when. He's had a stellar career across Europe for a number of years. He's performed really well in FIBA play over the journey. But I think they're going to go as far as Huertas and Neto take them, to be honest, in this tournament. Because you're right, they don't have the Anderson Varejãos and Leandro Barbosas and that sort of caliber player anymore on this roster. So they're going to be battling for second place in this group. It's not necessarily going to be easy. When we come to the other teams in a moment, I'll tell you why. But they're a good possible chance to at least make it through to the second round if things click. But they are going to need some of those younger players to really step up and play a role for them, and really keep that scoreboard ticking over, because that's where I could potentially see them struggling. They don't really have a guy like a Paddy Mills for Australia who can go out there and get you 25 or 30 points easily every single game. And they're going to need someone to really take on that mantle of that alpha dog, really.
Well, speaking of alpha dogs, we move on to Iran, who are 22nd in the world. Mohammad Javshidi was a prolific scorer in qualification, 32 points against Kazakhstan, 41 points against Syria. So clearly they know who their key scorer is. And very much like Puerto Rico in the episode that Jacob and I were talking about in Group B, they don't really have any notable players, but yet they're ranked 22nd in the world, which shows that their program is really strong and that they are a very together team, probably a very experienced team that's played a lot of basketball together and have a lot to offer in terms of potential upsets in this tournament.
And that's exactly right. And we've had the benefit of seeing Iran fair bit over the last few years through Australia being part of that Asian qualifying group now, or qualifying process in terms of FIBA World Cup qualifying. So we've seen Iran a couple of times up close and personal. They do still have some high level players though, but you're right, it's the core of this group that's played together for so long. Another one of those veteran teams that kind of grew up together and have just carried on representing their country at every opportunity whenever they can. They are headlined, although he's aging right now, by Hamed Haddadi, the veteran big man who spent a few years in the NBA with the Memphis Grizzlies and I believe a year with the Phoenix Suns. You already mentioned Jamshidi, and yeah, I mean, 73 points across those two qualifying games is electric. Bainam Yakchali, their point guard, and he was also their top scorer across their entire qualifier process, is another name to watch, keeps that engine driving. And then Arsalan Kazemi, who's a really tough, rugged power forward, kind of a poor man's Luis Scola, if you will, in many ways. But he's another one who's worth keeping an eye on for this team. Haddadi and Kazemi, unfortunately, under a bit of an injury cloud and not yet guaranteed to actually make the trip over to Jakarta for this group phase. But if they're there, then this team knows how to play together, and they could absolutely battle Brazil for second place in this group and a chance to advance to that second round.
The fourth team in Group G is Côte d'Ivoire, the Ivory Coast, who were the first team to qualify out of Africa this past qualifying window. So they've got Alex Pothris. I hope I've said that correctly. You'll soon correct me. You're very good at correct me on when I mispronounce names in the NBL. Sorry, Yanni Wetzel. But I think the Ivory Coast are one of those teams at 42nd in the world. You could be forgiven for thinking they're making up the numbers, but no one in this tournament is really making up the numbers because, the great thing about basketball is it's 5-on-5. Anyone could catch fire at any point in time and turn a game. And Alex Pothris obviously has a great deal of experience across a cup of coffee in the G League and I believe is a second round pick in the NBA. So he's been in that system and can lead this team to, potentially they could steal a game. I don't see it, but Tom, do you see them making any noise?
I think they actually could. They're actually a much better team than people probably give them credit for. I mean,
I like the
this is not.
nickname, the Elephants.
Yeah, exactly. This is not the first time they've qualified for the World Cup. In fact, it's going to be their fifth World Cup overall. They did play in 2019, but they've never made it to a knockout phase. We know that they're going to be up against it. But again, another team that kind of just knows how to get things done as a group. They topped their group in the African qualifiers with an 8-2 record. So they do have some cohesion, and they could make some noise. And these African teams, you never really know what you're going to get. Obviously, they like to push the pace. They're going to struggle against the size of a Spain and a Brazil, and even some of the Irani big men potentially. But that change of pace could throw some other teams off, and I wouldn't be surprised if they steal a game in group play, but I do not see them advancing. Just a couple of other names to keep an eye on. Matt Costello, who's a big power forward, plays for Baskonia in the EuroLeague. Jean-Philippe Daly, who's a 6'6" wing. Suleiman Diabate, who's their point guard, and Guy Eady, who's another wing scorer for them. And all of these guys played really strongly through their qualifier phase. And again, if one of them gets hot here or there, some luck needs to go their way, but I could see them potentially stealing a game against either Iran or Brazil.
So, Tom, which two teams are going to qualify from this group? I have to think Spain is definitely going to go through. They're almost immoral to proceed to the knockout phases. But which of the other three teams is most likely to make noise and get through to the second round?
I actually think it could be Iran in an upset, but I think it's out of Iran and Brazil. And again, as I said earlier about Brazil, it's really going to depend on who can step up for them and if they can get that high-level scoring they need. But something about Iran, if they're healthy, and I mentioned Haddadi and Kazemi who need to get over that injury cloud, but if they're healthy, I could see them upsetting Brazil and somehow sneaking into that second round as that second team. But Spain will absolutely top this group hands down.
There's always a surprise packet, I think, in all of these tournaments. And Iran, sneaky good at 22nd in the world, have all the tools to be able to get through to that second round. And Brazil, I think, are just lacking just a bit of polish overall to be able to get past them. So we're in agreement there. For Group H, the last group, and a very, very tough last group indeed. We've got, three teams that could very, very easily get through to the second round, and one of them is going to have to miss out. A fourth team that is ranked a bit lower in the world, so we'll talk about that as well. But we'll start with France. France are ranked fifth in the world. We know exactly who this team is. They've been together for so long, and a few players have chopped and changed over the journey and retired, but they have Rudy Gobert, they have Evan Fournier, they have Nick Batum, they have all of this top line, or at least has been top line NBA talent, and they know exactly who they are and how they play. They're probably got synergy to rival the Boomers team, and they will be very, very tough to beat. They'll always be around, at least at the quarterfinals, and you'd almost be silly for picking them to pick them not making the semis. They're always there, aren't they?
They absolutely are, and it's interesting because one of the teams we'll come to is Canada in this group. The bookmakers actually currently have Canada slightly ahead of France to top this group, but I think it's really neck and neck between those two teams. And you're right, this is a veteran team, again, like Spain, been around with a core group for a long period of time, and they know how to get it done. Their coach, Vincent Collet, super experienced in FIBA play. He's been the head of this program for a number of years. They obviously beat Australia, as I said, in the 2019 World Cup to take home the bronze. They took silver in Tokyo most recently. They topped their group in European qualifiers for the World Cup. They finished second at the 2022 Eurobasket. This is just a very, very successful European program with a lot of talent. There's a lot of interest in terms of who's not there for them, most notably Victor Wembanyama, who was originally hoping to play, but he's pulled out to focus on getting ready for his rookie NBA season. A couple of the younger guys like Teo Maladon, Usman Dieng, Guy Rayan Rupert, and Killian Hayes, obviously not there as well. But you mentioned some of that headline talent in Batum, Fournier, Rudy Gobert, and even Frankie Ntilikina, who was actually quite strong for them in Tokyo, hasn't really found success at the NBA level, but has always brings them like kind of that X factor role with this French national team. And he's another one to keep an eye on, as well as a couple of other veterans like Nando De Colo, and Australia's newest enemy, Gershon Yabusele, after what he did to Dante Hexam, who again, the guys that just been there and been around and know how to get it done in these big tournaments. So that core kind of 6 players are really strong. And again, they may not have as strong a roster top to bottom as they've had in past tournaments, but they cannot be discounted when it comes to these major tournaments.
And this is where the difference between NBA rules and FIBA rules can really be shown more than anywhere else. And that is in a group with France, a veteran of these sorts of tournaments, and Canada, who have barely been in any significant tournaments over the last few years.
Exactly.
I mean, all of these guys, you talked about Frank Ntilikina. There's a reason he's good at FIBA level, because he's always played FIBA basketball growing up, and it comes probably a lot more naturally to him than NBA basketball. So it's going to be really exciting to see these two teams against each other. We'll move on to Canada now. They're 15th in the world, and they, I would say, have the best top-level talent in the entire tournament in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jamal Murray. I mean, you could make an argument for the US, and I'm sure we will, but SGA was, right up there in MVP voting last year, a lot higher than anyone considered at the start of the season. Jamal Murray won a ring with Denver, and they have NBA talent as far as the eye can see on this roster. Dylan Brooks obviously signed a big deal. Dwight Powell signed an extension as well. Kelly Olynyk's been around a long time. Corey Joseph has been a journeyman, but he seems probably a bit more suited to the NBA game, the FIBA game rather than the NBA game as well. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our man O'Shea Brissett, who's a
waiting for it.
Who recently went over to the dark side to Matt McQuaid's Boston team. But, they've just got so much talent, and it's going to be difficult to see them going out early. But at the same time, this could be very much a situation like you saw in the Redeem Team documentary, where the players just didn't really gel with the FIBA rule set and didn't find their footing until a couple of tournaments down the line. Is that the danger?
It's absolutely the danger that they just don't have the track record as a group, and not all of them have experience in this style of basketball, and it could take some time for them to adjust. And I think this tournament for Canada is as much about starting that journey to become a global powerhouse as it is about finishing on the podium. But they could easily achieve both within the next month at this tournament, but it really needs to come together, and they need to figure it out quite quickly, because when you come up against these experienced European nations or against an Australia, these teams that have been there together and they're battle tested together in that environment, this is where these younger teams who haven't had that experience can really come unstuck sometimes. But you're right, they have that top to bottom headline talent. Even RJ Barrett, Lou Dort will come in and play a role for them at some point through this tournament. And I think that battle between Canada and France could be one of the best games of the opening round throughout the entire tournament, to be honest. I'm really looking forward to that one. Not sure which way it's going to go, but it's really going to come down to how quickly this Canadian team can come together. They've been really strong through FIBA qualifying, but a lot of the players that have been in that qualifying phase, like with Australia, with all the NBL talent, aren't necessarily the guys that are going to be there at the major tournament now. And that's the difference between a Boomers team and a Canadian team, where the guys coming in to play in these tournaments have done it before for the Boomers, not necessarily the case for Canada. But I love what they're building. I love that they are kind of on their rise. And this is absolutely one of the teams that everyone is going to be keeping their eyes on as this tournament kind of progresses.
I don't think anyone necessarily expects Canada to win the whole thing, but they probably expect a really strong showing, and they may very well go into Paris as favourites, depending on who carries through to this roster. If they retain Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, if they retain Jamal Murray and bring across even more of that Canadian talent that's entered the NBA more recently, then they could be, a mainstay in FIBA medal rounds for a decade to come.
No doubt. But they have to get these runs on the board, and they have to get some of these guys kind of battle tested and blooded, if you will.
And probably the team that's going to give them a few fits is Latvia. They're 29th in the world, and we talk about, teams that are used to the FIBA style of play. Well, Kristaps Porzingis is obviously an NBA player, as is Davis Bertans, as is Roddy Kurucs, but All of these guys have grown up in the FIBA system. They're all NBA level talents, but they can all score in bunches. They're all shooters. So, Latvia could shoot the lights out and take a game away from Canada. I think the counter argument to that is they don't have the guard talent that Canada do. So they're going to find it very, very difficult to compete on the perimeter.
That's exactly right, and that's the knock for me on this team. But they're another team that plays really strongly together. They topped their group in the European qualifiers for this World Cup at 9-1, and that's really tough to do in those European groups. But this is their first World Cup qualification ever. So again, a group that I don't know how much they've actually played together, because you don't get all of those NBA names all the time. We know Porzingis played some of the FIBA qualifiers when he was able to during the NBA offseason, like August last year, for example. Davis Bertans, you mentioned his brother Darius as well, and Kuruks. And they do have some other really strong players. Roland Smits, who's no relation to Rick. I don't want to get you too excited. But he's another star of European basketball, currently playing for Zalgiris in Lithuania. So they have a lot of talent. And you're right, if they get hot, they could take a game away from Canada or even possibly France.
Yeah, you never know.
But I do worry they have a number of players that are kind of those stretch bigs, play really similar roles. And where is that guard level play going to come from? And also, how effective are they going to be defensively? That's the other question I have on this group. But stranger things have happened. You never know. But I think it's Canada and France that are likely going to emerge out of this group when all is said and done.
Agree. I mean, you have to consider how Latvia are going to stop Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jamal Murray in the perimeter, and the answer is they're not. I mean, they just don't have the talent to be able to stop two NBA All-Star, NBA Championship level players. The remaining team in this group is Lebanon. Lebanon are 43rd in the world. So at this point, I think they are drawn into arguably the toughest group in the entire World Cup. And for Lebanon, they're going to struggle to be able to make a lot of noise in this tournament, despite obviously qualifying for this tournament. So they have the credentials to be able to play. But I think it's going to be a pretty rough draw for this Lebanon team.
It is. And again, another team that we've had the chance to see a little bit through the Asian qualifying process. They were actually the first team to qualify out of Asia into this World Cup, ultimately finished second in their group behind New Zealand. It's their fourth World Cup, but they've never made it to a knockout phase. And again, like Iran, they're a veteran core group that knows how to play together, but they just don't have that headline talent that these other nations do. They are bringing Amari Spellman, who's a guy who's had a cup of coffee in the NBA with Atlanta and the Golden State Warriors. He's going to debut for them in this tournament. Again, he has no experience in FIBA play, hasn't played with any of these teammates before, currently playing in Korea as well. So he's not like a high-level NBA talent anyway. But, there's some other guys that can make some noise. Wael Arakji, who's one of their most prolific scorers and actually gave the Boomers fits at times during qualifying the last couple of years. Sergio Eldawich and Ali Mansour, two other really experienced players to keep an eye on. But these guys don't have the talent. I can't see them taking a game in this group. But, they'll compete and they'll play hard as they always do.
So for Group H, I think we're in agreement. France and Canada are in the box seat to go through. However, I will ask you this. What order will they finish in? Who will finish first?
Well, as I said before, the bookmakers have Canada slight favourites, but I actually think it's going to be France. And I think it's going to come down to that experience factor in group play. I can see Canada getting stronger as the tournament goes on, and they may ultimately finish higher than France when all is said and done. But I just have a feeling that France will take that head-to-head game between these two teams, and that will be the difference between obviously topping the group and finishing second.
Just giving me a lot of deja vu of that 2004 Olympic US team and 2006 US World Cup team as well. I think they're going to grow into something very, very special, but it's probably not going to be this year. If it is this year, then look out. They're the world's oyster probably for the next decade, as I said, and we're going to see a lot of Australia, Canada, US games over the next few years that are going to be pretty special. Tom, thanks for joining me for Group G and Group H. We're on the cusp of the exhibition games, and we'll come to you after those conclude. Any call-outs you want to make heading into those exhibition games, particularly with Australia cutting down the squad to 12?
Well, I mean, just in terms of the teams we've just spoken about, Brazil is one team that we will see in those qualifying games at Rod Laver Arena. So it will give us a better indication of what they're going to be about. But I'm not expecting any of those teams to challenge the Boomers, Venezuela, Brazil, and South Sudan. But those teams will all compete. They all play a slightly different style as well, which would be good for the Boomers to face. But yeah, that's probably it. And I think it's going to be a great opportunity for some of these guys that we think in that final 15 of the Boomers that are really battling for those remaining spots. And I'm talking about like a Xavier Cooks in my mind, probably a battle with Jack White potentially for one of those last remaining spots. Delhi versus potentially a Dyson Daniels or a Dante Exum, that those are going to be some interesting battles. And just really starting to get a feel for who's going to play what role when this team actually travels over to Okinawa, who's going to be in that starting unit, and who's really going to be taking the reins for this team. And I would expect that to be a big combination. Obviously, Paddy Mills, but I think Josh Giddey's going to be really prolific in terms of how this team functions and runs day to day as that lead guard.
Well, you'll be with us the whole way, and you'll be over in Okinawa for the group phase. So, Tom Hirsch, thanks for joining me on the Podium Pod.
Thanks, Adam. Cheers.
Podium Pod, once again, brought to you by the Pick and Roll. Head to pickandroll.com.au and subscribe for in-depth commentary and analysis on Aussie hoops. We'll see you again next time.